All right, good evening. How's everyone doing? Awesome. Quick show of hands, how many people are familiar with Viori? Oh, that's a lot of hometown love right there. I'm very grateful because this business was really built from this place outward. And this really was the source of inspiration for the brand. So thank you for all your support. There's no way I would be sitting here talking to you all if it wasn't for all the support we felt in San Diego. You know, today Viori is, as he mentioned, $4 billion valuation, building a global business. It's really exciting, but it was not very long ago that we were in a little garage on 2nd Street in Encinitas, starting out. Viori was a true bootstrap business. As a matter of fact, the owner of that garage is in the crowd. His name's Mike Bersall. He's the proprietor at C3 Bank. But thank you, Mike, for all the free rent over the years. But I get asked to talk and share the Vuori story from time to time, and I actually politely decline quite often because I'm a pretty heads down person. I'm a little bit more introverted. I love to be in my business, but I agreed to speak here tonight for a couple of reasons. Number one is that I love San Diego. I met my wife. I have both my kids here in San Diego. They're up here in the front row. I moved here when I was 18, and San Diego really changed my life. I moved from Seattle. I'll talk a little bit about that in my story. But this place, this North County kind of bubble that we live in, was really the inspiration for what we do today at Viori. And so I have a lot of love for San Diego. And number two, I love the entrepreneurial journey. Raise your hand if you're involved in a startup or you're starting a business. That's what it's all about. There's not a lot of things in life that have the power to show you who you really are as a human being, quite like entrepreneurship. And there's not a lot of things that have the power to inspire communities, inspire people to influence real positive change in the world, quite like entrepreneurship. So I'm a big fan, and I'm going to share my story tonight in the hopes that maybe there are a couple things that I learned along the way that can be helpful to you on your journey. So we've got a long time. We've got 45 minutes. I've actually never given a 45-minute talk about myself and Viori, and so I'm going to start from the beginning and give you guys the long-form story. I think some of this stuff is helpful in informing kind of who I am, how I thought about the business. But I grew up in Seattle, really small town, a very rural town. It was called Vashon Island. It was just outside of Seattle in the Puget Sound. We had one little blinking light. It was very rural. And I was raised by two very loving parents. We were very rich in love, rich in values, not very rich when it comes to material things. But my mom was a psychologist, and more than that, she studied indigenous tribes, she studied Native American spirituality, and she led women's groups and ultimately taught people how to go out and vision quest out in nature. My father was a brilliant guy. He studied engineering at Columbia University. And then his senior year, before he graduated, he realized he was living his dad's dream for him, and he quit school, and he wanted to pursue a career in acupuncture and naturopathic medicine. He was fascinated by the body's ability to heal itself. And so here I was, a kid that all I wanted to do was play sports and fit in. And I had these really interesting parents. So my house was never the cool house to come to. There was no Coke in the fridge. There was nothing going on there. But my parents taught me one thing. And as much as I rejected kind of how I was being raised, maybe when I was young, my parents really taught us that life is short and that you have to follow your curiosities and to really pursue what you're passionate about. Don't let other people figure that out for yourself. Even if it doesn't pay a lot of money, pursue what you're passionate about. And that really came back to serve me in entrepreneurship. But I was a really dyslexic kid. I could not study, I couldn't sit still. My mom, God bless her, she would sit down with me and help me with my homework every night, and she would get me through school. She would help me kind of wrote my book reports, if I'm being honest. But she always knew that at some point it would click for me. And she was going to make sure I had a fighting chance. So, so grateful for my mother. But I grew up in Seattle. My senior year of high school, it rained every day for 6 months. It set a record. And so I think to escape that, I did what a lot of kids did. I watched one of the best television shows ever created, Baywatch. You guys are supposed to laugh at those ones. But you guys know Baywatch, Pamela Anderson, David Hasselhoff, Hobie, Kelly Slater. But I was always fascinated by Southern California, coastal beach life, culture. It was fascinating to me, I think, growing up in Seattle. And for folks that are in the room that grew up outside of California, you probably could resonate with that. Southern California is just a very aspirational place. It wasn't very much for me. But I was planning to go to University of Washington, and I got a brochure from USD, University of San Diego. And this pamphlet comes in the mail, and I open it up. It's from the football program. They were recruiting me to go play football. And I just remember I saw this beautiful castle on this hill, this perfect grass. And I told my mom, I was like, I need to look into this school. And so I called the admissions office. I didn't ask them about any of their academic programs. I asked them how far away they were from the beach. And they told me 7 miles. And that was good enough for me. I was like, I'm going to school there. And so I went down, I left Washington, best move of my life. I came here to San Diego. I studied accounting. I was in the business school. I had a knack for numbers. All of those things my mom had hoped would happen did. When my back was against the wall and I had to learn how to study, I took an active interest in it. And I started learning how to sit with myself and my thoughts and read and apply myself. And I was on a financial aid scholarship, so I had to maintain good grades, and I did that. But I excelled in accounting. And so I ended up studying accounting. My junior year, I got an internship with a big firm here in town called Ernst & Young. And after you intern, oftentimes if you do a good job, there's a job offer waiting for you when you graduate. And so that was my situation. I went into my senior year of college with a job waiting for me. So at USD, you would graduate in May, and then the careers at Ernst & Young started in October. So I had this summer break. And a lot of my friends went abroad and studied. One of my buddies, TJ, went to Spain. He's in the room starting a business here in San Diego. But a lot of my friends went abroad. I never left the country. I'd only been to Mexico for spring break. I'd never been, to Europe, and that was always a dream. So I was surfing in La Jolla one day, and this person asked me if I'd be interested in modeling. And I kind of laughed, and a lot of my friends still make fun of me for this till this day, which I understand. But I normally would never take a meeting like this, but I was like, okay. She started to explain to me that her son was modeling and working in Europe and traveling the world and meeting people from all these different walks of life. And so I said, okay, I'll take a meeting. I needed to figure out what I was going to do that summer. And I ultimately got chosen to go and work for this agency in Milan. I got my diploma, and I got on a plane that night, and I went to Milan. And I was just thrown into this world. And what was originally planned to be a summer job turned into 2 years. I wrote a letter to Ernst & Young. It had, I think, some wine stains on it. It was handwritten. But I wrote him a letter and just said, I've found a better way of life. And I think I probably gave them some advice on how they should be living their lives, something very idealistic. But ultimately I said I wasn't going to come back in the fall. And I spent 2 years working as a model, traveling around from Milan to Barcelona to Hamburg in Germany to New York. I was on this circuit, I was meeting people. It was a really incredibly inspiring time. And I was a really shy kid growing up, so the idea of being in front of a camera or on a runway was terrifying for me. And that became a bit of a theme of my life, is having this relationship with discomfort and fear. And we'll talk about that later. But ultimately, I didn't resonate with being a model. But for me, it was the first time that I watched designers build product. And I was so inspired by this creative process. And I loved watching them work with textiles and tell stories. And I started to connect with the power of a consumer brand and how inspiring they can be. And I was a kid that, again, I played contact sports my whole life. So I never had nurtured a creative bone in my body. I'd never taken an art class. But this is the first time that I started realizing, maybe I could do something creative in my life. So I came back after 2 years. I'd missed too many of my friends' weddings. I was ready to come back to San Diego. And I begged Ernst & Young for my job back. And so I came back, I got my career going. This was at a time when Sarbanes-Oxley was new, so it was like the full Employment Act for accountants, and so they were happy to take me back. I got my CPA license, I spent 2 years at the firm, and during this time, I met a girl who was studying fashion design in LA. And I lived in San Diego, and when she graduated, she was getting opportunities to go work in Los Angeles. But I lived in San Diego, we didn't want to be long distance. And here I was working at Ernst & Young. I think I was working, 40 to 60 hours on a good week. I was making $45,000 a year. And so I felt like I was the perfect candidate to be her business partner and her financier for a fashion startup. And so we started a company called Sammy Joe. And, we were so naive and so young. I think I was 24 years old. But on the weekends, we would drive to LA, and we would go to these big stores, and we would work with these jobbers. They essentially would buy remnant fabric, and they would sell it retail. And we would buy whatever we found that we liked, and then we would take it back to San Diego, and we would work with local pattern makers and cut and sew facilities and dye houses, and we just threw ourselves in, not knowing what we were doing, but we learned how apparel was made. And we quickly learned, after a couple years, that what we were doing was never scalable. We were under-resourced. We had no time. We weren't in with 2 feet. And it was killing our relationship. And so we ended up closing that business. And I decided at that point, I'm like, if I ever go back into apparel, I'm going to do it differently. But around this time, I'm ready to leave Ernst & Young. And I got an opportunity to go work in the staffing industry. And I met a couple of people that encouraged me to join them on their team, which I did, and I worked in business development for this staffing company. And this was another thing that I was just scared shitless of. The idea of working in sales, for me and my personality, and picking up the phone and making cold calls was frightening. But I knew, I was like, I need to cultivate this skill in my life. And so I went and took this on, and I just would sit there, I would force myself to make 200 phone calls in a day, as scared as I was. And that became really empowering for me. Being, I think, a subpar male model, I was used to rejection. But this was like a whole nother level of rejection working in sales. But after a short amount of time, we decided to leave and start our own company. And we called it Vaco San Diego. And we developed a really great business. We built a community around our brand. We built a tribe. We had a lot of fun together. It was an awesome place to work, and we built a thriving company. We had a couple of hundred people working for us. And as soon as I had a little bit of success and I had some extra time on my hands, I started thinking about apparel again. And I met a gentleman named Chad Alessandro. Chad was an incredible graphic designer. And we decided we were going to start a men's fashion brand. And really it was a graphic t-shirt brand. We made some hoodies and sweatshirts, but it was all made from organic cotton materials. Every piece we made was a collaboration with a different humanitarian or a philanthropist that we wanted to support their cause. It was a beautiful mission, awesome product. We went to market, we sold to all of these incredible boutiques with the hope that Nordstrom or one of these bigger retailers would pick us up. And then we ran into 2007, 2008 in the financial crisis. And it was a really hard time for me. Chad decided that he wanted to go and travel in an RV and not work on the business anymore. And so I was left with no choice but to close that business. And this was a really tough time in my life. I had gotten married, I was divorced. I had just poured all of my life savings into 2 apparel brands that never really kind of got out of the gates. I had one business that I had started that was successful, this staffing company. But after about 5 years of doing it, I realized something that was so empowering for me. And that was that money ultimately was never going to motivate me. It was never going to motivate me long term to show up day in and day out. I had to do something that was more connected to my heart, my passion, my interests, and my values. And at around that time, I was dealing with a lot of back pain. Again, I played contact sports my whole life. A friend suggested that I try yoga to heal my back. And I'll never forget my first class. I went down to Bindu in Del Mar. It's no longer there. But it was like I stepped into this thriving community with incredible teachers and a loyal group of people that practiced at the studio, and I became obsessed. I started going to class every day. And I started realizing it was not only good for my back, but it was also good for my mind and my spirit. It was a really powerful time. And during that time, I started meeting new people, and I decided, okay, this chapter of my life is going to be called Seeking Clarity. You know, I decided to stop the partying. I stopped dating women. I kind of became a recluse, honestly. I was like, would just hang out at my house. I would read a lot, and I was so interested. I was like, okay, things aren't showing up in my life the way that I want them to. I wasn't meeting the right life partner. I was just kind of just feeling like very much average or kind of down with my situation. And so I started really investing in my happiness and treating it like an active pursuit. And during that time, I met a guy named Chris Miller, and Chris had started some awesome apparel brands and footwear brands. One of them was called Planet Earth, which was one of the first sustainable action sports brands. And then the other was called Audio Footwear, and they sponsored Tony Hawk and a bunch of others. Chris is a famous skateboarder. He's one of the best pool skaters ever to live. And Chris got into yoga to kind of continue to support him in being a good skater. And we became really good friends, and we would surf together, and we started talking about the market. And you know, it was interesting because you had the big mainstream activewear brands that we grew up with as athletes that were really distributed at mass market retail. They had a very specific look and feel to them. It was like big brand logos, baggy fits, shiny synthetic material. They worked with kind of cheaper materials because the dirty secret was they were really premium footwear brands, but they sold their apparel to the same distribution channel that they sold their footwear to, which was mass market. And so they could never break into premium apparel. And it always looked and felt like product that identified you as somebody going to the gym or somebody going to compete in a sport. It was the antithesis of the type of product that people around our community in Encinitas wanted to wear. And so we always thought there was this interesting culture gap where people in North County weren't wearing these mainstream activewear brands. They were wearing board shorts that were designed for surfing because they resonated with that lifestyle. They grew up in these kind of subcultures of Southern California, of surf and skate and snow. And so they wouldn't wear these mainstream brands that kind of identified you as a jock. And then at the time you had Lululemon that was coming into the space, and they were going up channel, better materials, better construction, better fit. And that was very inspiring, but it was always product that was made for women. It wasn't compelling to men, especially at the time. And they've come a long way, I'll give them credit, but in those early days, it was very much a women's brand. And so we felt like we didn't have a brand for us. So we were wearing board shorts that were designed for surfing, and we started thinking, what if we could create performance apparel that would resonate with this community? And at the heart of it, we were gonna make it a lot more casual by nature. We were gonna work with the best materials. If we couldn't find them, we were gonna make them. And we would work with fabrics that you just wanted to live in. They were so comfortable, with colors that looked like they had been kissed by the sun. And everything we made would have functional details that would support you through a tough workout. It would be moisture wicking and quick drying and breathable and all these things that had become kind of the cultural orthodox of the activewear category. But we were gonna strip our product down to the basics and make it just easy to wear. Make it easy for guys to look good and feel good. And it was a new perspective on our category. It didn't exist. It looked very different. And so that was the idea. And Chris and I decided, we're gonna do this. And he was like, you're gonna quit your job first. So that's what happened. We needed to raise some money. And after having been through 2 other apparel brands, with not a lot of success, a lot of learning moments, but not a lot of success, I made one of the toughest decisions of my professional career. And I chose to leave this staffing company that I had built over an 8-year period. And I had grown really comfortable with this lifestyle. I had great disposable income. But I realized, I think one of the biggest blessings maybe my parents gave me is this acute awareness of how short my life is. And I was like, am I just gonna take the easy street and sure, I'll have a nice cushy life, but like, am I really doing something that lights me up? Am I thinking big enough? And the answer for me was no. And I saw this opportunity for Viori so crystal clear. A lot of people thought we were nuts. Like, how are you gonna go compete with Nike and Lululemon and all these brands? But we saw nothing but white space. And so I decided I was gonna quit my job. And the first thing we needed to do was raise money, which, I likened raising money for a startup apparel brand to starting a band and telling all your friends and family you're gonna be the next Rolling Stones, and you just need a little bit of money to go produce an album and go out on the road. It was like, people looked at me and they're like, you've already failed at this twice. Keep your job, what are you doing? Has Joe lost his mind? It was really hard. We got rejection after rejection after rejection. At the time, you gotta remember, this is when there was this cohort of direct-to-consumer brands, Warby Parker and Casper, and all these brands that promised to kind of eliminate the middleman and go direct-to-consumer. And investors loved this distribution strategy. It didn't even really care. Like, people were just they were walking the hallways at Target, taking everyday items and saying, we're the next direct-to-consumer brand of that, and they were raising a lot of money. For us, it wasn't about a distribution strategy or a marketing hook. It was about building differentiated product with a differentiated brand point of view and building a community and doing it the old-fashioned way. And a lot of investors didn't really get what we were trying to do, and we got a lot of rejection. And then one day, a guy named Michael Magerman decided he was going to invest. Michael Magerman is a San Diego guy. He started a business called Odyssey Golf. For you golfers, probably know their putters. But Michael decided, he was looking at the yoga space and he kind of saw the same thing that we saw. And this is a crazy stat, but at the time there were 30 million people practicing yoga in the US. And I think it was like 25, 30%, I think it was 8 million of them were men. And men's was the fastest growing demographic, but there was no brand speaking to them. Let alone the rise in studio fitness. You had SoulCycle and Equinox and CrossFit and all of these experiential, community-based fitness programs were just blowing up in the US. And so instead of going to bars after work, people were going to these studio classes with their friends, and then they were going and getting a drink or getting dinner afterwards. So the apparel that you started wearing was more and more important. But there was nothing available for men. So Michael saw this opportunity as well. And he wrote a check. And quickly after, some of his friends wrote a check. Mike Persall, who generously donated his garage to us, wrote a check. And we all of a sudden raised $400,000. And so we had a little bit of money. We needed now to build a team. And I had sensibilities around product, but I was not an expert. I needed help. So there was a designer, a woman named Rebecca Bray, who Chris had worked with in his past. And Chris suggested we meet. She told me later she took a meeting with me to politely decline because she was working on a golf startup here in town. But she had this awesome background between golf, action sports, and performance. And she took a meeting, and by the end of the meeting, we were describing this vibe that we wanted to create and this product that was more casual by nature. It was more effortless. It was more versatile. And she was like, I have to be a part of this. She saw it so clearly. It was such a natural extension of her own aesthetic that she had to join. The second meeting I took was with a woman named Nikki Sakilio, who is today our CMO. And Nikki was working at a company called Prana as their director of marketing, but she had worked before that in the surf industry, she had a great background between like surf and beach culture, as well as like the outdoor industry and yoga with prana. And by the end of our meeting, we were finishing each other's sentences, and she was like, I can't believe somebody hasn't done this before. Like, I've always thought about this. And so the three of us ventured out and started a business together. And you know, we needed a place to work, and I told you about the garage, but it was a funny story. Mike called me one day, he's like, hey, we got this garage in the back of our office, and you're welcome to come and check it out. And so I did, and I remember it was just like dark, it was like cobwebs, it was all beat up. And I took a couple photos and I sent it to Nikki. I'm like, hey, we can either pay $1,000 a month, or we can take this garage and get started here. And she wrote me back, she's like, I can use that $1,000 a month for marketing, let's go for the garage. And I was like, I knew I had my girl. But we've always had incredible support along the way. You know, Mike with ABB Capital and C3 Bank have been incredible supporters over the years. And I'll get to another story where that's very much true. But the three of us got started, and one of the reasons I believe we are successful, I always say that great businesses are a group of talented people that are aligned by a common vision. So we don't have this like push and pull. You don't have different egos pulling you in different directions. Everybody saw the same future. We were so crystal clear on what was Vuori, what wasn't Vuori, what the product looked like, what the brand was. And so every person thereafter that joined us on this journey saw the same thing. It was so reinforced from an early stage. So Rebecca told me, she's like, I can't give you 40 hours a week. I'm working on this other startup, but I can work after hours and on the weekends. And that's what we had. So that's what we did. And I would show up at 5 o'clock to Rebecca's house, or she'd come to the office, and we would design clothes. We would get the fit right, and we finally got samples. And once I got samples, I knew that I needed to get out on the road. So I booked a flight to New York. I took a little bag with me. And at the time, you know, I told you about the rise of studio fitness, but there were a lot of women's brands that were launching these premium women's activewear brands, and they were kind of following in Lululemon's footsteps, and they were selling through these, what we call point of participation. It's places where people go to sweat. Pilates studios, yoga studios, gyms, and a lot of them were building great little businesses, selling wholesale through this channel. And so I got a meeting with kind of the kingpin, like the main gatekeeper to this whole space, and that was Equinox. I flew to New York. I was so excited for this meeting. I was going to show them this new perspective on performance apparel. And the head of retail is a woman named Annie. She's still there today. And her and I laugh about this today. But she told me, she goes, this product will never sell in New York City. She was like, this looks like swim trunks or some like obscure version of everyday casual wear. This is not active wear. And she was like, you should get rid of the drawstring. She started giving me design advice on what we should do with our product. But we were so resolute. So, you know, we got a couple more meetings on that trip, but pretty much came home with our tail tucked between our legs. It's funny because today we're the #1 activewear brand at Equinox nationally. But we came back from that trip. We sold into a couple other studios that were willing to take a risk. And we were gearing up for our launch in the spring of 2015. And our launch was very underwhelming. It was essentially Nikki and I emailing all of our distant aunts and uncles and grandparents and announcing that we were bringing this new perspective on performance apparel to the market. It was a new take on men's yoga. It was going to change the world. And I think we posted on our Facebook page organically, not paid. But we launched the business. And, you know, again, maybe I think my mom bought a pair of pants, you know, but it was pretty much a non-event. And that's when the real work began. We shipped our product to all these yoga studios and gyms that took a chance on us. And it wasn't very long before we realized that the product just was not selling through. It was a really rough start. And, you know, we realized that men were reluctant enough to go to yoga, let alone stick around afterwards and shop. It's kind of like a head scratcher. Now it's like, yeah, it's pretty obvious. But but at the time there was a lot of brands building these great women's businesses. And so after about our first year, we were running out of money. The one thing that we did really well in that first year is, again, going back to C3 Bank. Do you guys know C3 Bank? Raise your hand if you know C3 Bank. Okay, so they have a beautiful bank. It's stone and glass building on Coast Highway. And again, Mike, one of our investors, told me, look, we're going to build a bank building down here on the 101. But it'll take a year to get through permitting, and there's this cool little like one-story retail store. It was a little off the beaten path of like where the heart of traffic was in Encinitas, but we said we'll take it. And so we did all the work ourselves. We fixed it up, and we converted this space into, it was like a third retail, a third we created an art gallery, and then a third we officed out of. And it was a big moment for us. We graduated from the office. We moved into the backstock area of our first retail store. We were excited. And that period of time was the first time. We didn't know how to get people to buy our product, but we started throwing these awesome parties and these awesome art shows. And we would invite everybody, parents, kids, everybody was welcome. And we would invite other entrepreneurs that were starting their brands. And we would let them showcase their products to our community. And before you know it, we'd have 350, 400 people coming. The cops would oftentimes break up these parties because they were so much fun. And before you knew it, people around town started wearing Viori. And we were like, man, there's something to this community building. And that really stuck with us. But I'll get back to that. So at the time, we're running out of money. We have maybe 4 months of capital left. And we knew that our strategy was a flawed one. We knew we were just going to run out of business. Everybody kept saying, with that $400,000 you raised, you need to define your engine of growth so you can go back to investors and get more money. And we hadn't defined really anything. And so we made one of the biggest decisions in our company's history that really set us on a new trajectory. We decided if people were ever going to understand what our vision for this brand was, we were going to have to tell it to them directly. And so we stopped focusing on chasing around all these yoga studios and we went all in on a direct-to-consumer strategy. And it sounds obvious now, but at the time, you got to remember it was very early in advertising on social media. But we worked with this digital agency and they told us, they're like, you're going to have to invest $10,000 in order to get enough data through your website that you can start to respond and be nimble and react. And I was freaked. I was like, $10,000 with no guarantee we're going to get anything back. And here I was. I didn't take a salary from the business. I was living off savings. We were really frugal in those early days. But we decided this is the only shot we have. And so we started selling online, and I remember in the first month we invested that $10,000 in marketing and we got about $10,000 back. So we got some customers, didn't make any money, but we got some customers, and with every time a customer purchased, we had a post-purchase survey that would accompany the order, and we would ask them what they were using the product for, what they liked, what they disliked. And that was so powerful for us because what we heard, here we were this like men's yoga brand, and what we heard is people were using the product for running, for working out in the gym, for hiking, for traveling, for lounging on the couch. They were doing like 20 things before they were doing yoga. And so we were going to market with the wrong message. So I remember one day I'm sitting there on my couch and I would obsess over this kind of stuff. And I pulled up a Photoshop window and I dropped all of the different colors of our most popular short. It was called the Core Short. So it's still our best-selling short. Some of you in the room probably have this short. But I dropped all the different colors across the bottom of the screen, and on the top I just wrote the words train, run, travel, surf, chill. And I started thinking about like how I live my life, and I was like, I don't want to define for people what these shorts are for. I want to speak to the versatility of the shorts and speak to the way that customers are telling us that they're using them and what they love about them. And it was incredible. I sent that to the digital agency, and before you knew it, our dollar of advertising was returning $2. and then $3, and then $4. And we were able to take this engine of growth back to our investors, and we hadn't really proved anything at scale, but we proved that we had a product market fit. We started evolving away and opening the aperture away from just solely men's yoga and putting the brand in a box, and really started speaking to the way that people were approaching this product and this brand through this appreciation of versatility. And it was a very powerful moment for us. And we raised another $1.5 million in what we called our Series A at the time. I think the business was valued at $6 million. And so we gave away quite a bit of the company at that time. But I told myself, I don't ever want to have to go through that again. I don't want to ever have to raise money like that again, with my back against the wall. And I was fortunate enough to listen to Kevin Plank talk. You know, Kevin Plank's the founder of Under Armour. And at a time when founders were raising their Series A, B, C, D, and they were obsessed with their valuations that were up and to the right and calculating their net worth on paper, Kevin said, founders today have it all wrong. And if you develop the right relationship with your supply chain, you won't have to keep going back to the market for more capital. They can serve as your investor and as your bank. And so I started thinking about it. I became obsessed with our working capital model. And I started treating our vendors, our factories, like they were investors. I presented the business to them. I would call them regularly. I would always plant the seed that we were gonna need terms, that we had a lot of factories that were wanting to do business with us, but we were gonna need some terms. And when the business had zero credit, wasn't profitable, we got that factory to believe in us. And they gave us 15-day terms, and then 30, and 45, and then 60, and eventually 75-day LDP terms. So we were able to bring in inventory, we were able to sell it via our direct-to-consumer channels, we were able to ship it to wholesale partners that we were doing business with, collect money, and then go back and pay our vendors. And we were able to build the business that we have today based on that working capital model without ever needing to put another dollar on the balance sheet. And that is the power of building incredible relationships with your partners. So that's something that I really believe in deeply. So a lot of people ask us when we knew that we had something as a brand. Like, when did we really know we were onto something? And you know, we had built this awesome D2C engine, and it was gaining some traction, but still relatively small and very niche. And we didn't know, was it just playing in Southern California, or did this brand have a bigger opportunity? And we always knew that if there was a wholesale partner that would be right for us, it was REI, because they understood performance apparel, and we just felt something about REI. And so I got a meeting with one of their marketing folks out at a trade show, and I brought him a bag of product. I asked him some questions. He didn't know anybody in the buying group, and it was kind of a not very eventful meeting. But about 6 months later, REI reached out to us, and they told us Lewis, the gentleman that I met with, was wearing one of our hoodies in the hallway, and the buyer took notice of what he was wearing and asked him about it. He said, oh, it's this cool startup in San Diego, you should give him a call. So they reached out to us, they invited us to Seattle, and we went up there and we showed them what we were doing. And they told us that they were interested in a premium men's activewear test. In 10 of their major metro doors, they wanted to test this category. And they wanted Vuori to be a part of it. So they bought into what we were doing, and they bought into a couple other emerging brands that were starting around the same time. And then they mixed in some of the legacy brands like Nike, and then some of the outdoor brands like Patagonia and North Face. And in that 10-door test, Vuori had the #1 performing product. We outperformed Nike and Patagonia. And it was a moment for us that we were like, wow, maybe we're onto something. They decided they wanted to grow us from 10 doors to 70 doors. And that's a big jump. Anybody that's in the retail business knows that when you do business with these big folks, they can crush you if it doesn't work. We had a lot of confidence in what we were doing at this time. So we grew to 70 doors. We maintained the best selling inventory. When we got to all doors the following season, we maintained our position as the #1 most productive inventory. And today, we're the #1 activewear brand at REI. which is incredibly rewarding and something we're very proud of. They've been an incredible partner. Nordstrom was a much different path. Nordstrom, I was calling them all the time, trying to get an appointment. They finally agreed to meet us. We went up to Seattle and they were like, I don't really get it. This doesn't really make sense. It doesn't fit in our activewear category because this is what activewear looks like. And we're backing Nike. And it doesn't really look like sportswear either, so I don't know where to put you. And they were really focused on trying to figure out where premium women's activewear would go in their floor, let alone men's. It was just too early for them. But they said, look, if you want to list your product and drop ship on our website, we'll let you do that. So we did that. Sales were just okay. The following season, we went to them and said, look, Viori is all about our fabric and our feel, which is true. You need to bring this product into your doors. Give it a test. We'll take any inventory back that doesn't work, but just test it in 5 doors. And they did that, and sales were just, again, kind of okay, just waffling along. We weren't really proving anything. There was never going to be really an investment from Nordstrom in our brand. And then I went up there to show them the next season, and I was convinced we had a plan. We were going to talk to them about how we were going to grow to 25 doors and get more investment. And that was very contrary to the plan that they had, which was to tell us that actually you guys are coming out of all 5 doors, you're going back to online only, which was essentially going to be the death of that relationship. And I told the buyer, with all due respect, you have no idea what you're talking about. And we kind of got into it. And I was so passionate. I was like, you don't see what's happening in this marketplace. You don't understand how the customer is evolving. And I think before she called security, her boss happened to walk right by. And this is why I always feel like on this journey, there's just been a little bit of an angel sitting on our shoulder. We've worked really hard, yes, and we saw an opportunity, but we don't do this stuff alone. There was definitely a little angel on the shoulder. And her boss walked by and asked, what are you looking at in here? And she said, oh, it's this brand Viori. And he's like, oh, I love Viori. I have a pair of their shorts. And he came into the conference room and he started asking me about, so why'd you start the brand? He's like, I love your product. And he just got it. Everything we said, he understood. He's like, this is where the market's going. And meanwhile, she was just sitting there like, silence. But he was like, we're going to get behind this. And so sure enough, we left Seattle that day with a commitment to grow our account base to 20 doors. And not only that, but they started to believe in what we were doing and give us some prominent floor space and give us some marketing on their website. And all of a sudden we started to define that engine of growth with Nordstrom. It was really exciting. And so, you know, I've got limited time here, but I just want to share that from that point forward, you know, the business was growing. We were doubling the business year over year. In 2018, we launched women's. And it wasn't because we just were chasing a business opportunity. We always, from day one, knew that Viori was a community brand. Women were just as much a part of that as men. And so we were excited in 2018 to leverage some of the fabrics that we became famous for in men's to launch our women's business. And women's did really well. We were growing and growing and growing. And then we hit COVID. And COVID was really hard because Nordstrom and REI and all these accounts called us and they said, don't ship us any more inventory. And we were panicked because we had bought a lot of inventory for them that was sitting in our warehouse. But we decided one thing that was also a really great decision. We said, hold advertising strong, don't pull back. Because there's a chance that what we do will become highly relevant to the way people are living their lives during the pandemic. And that's exactly what happened. And our dollar in advertising started going 4 times as far as it used to, and we started reaching so many people. And we went from thinking our business might be going out of business, we were down modeling, showing the board these bottom of the barrel cases, and we ended up tripling the size of our business that year. And then we went out and doubled the business again in 21, more than doubled, and then doubled again in 22, and all of a sudden, the front end of the business was outpacing our ability to invest in infrastructure. And the business has never really slowed down since that time. But it's been an incredible journey. And our path, you know, really has been a long, winding road. It's been complete with just about everything that makes entrepreneurship such a special path. So many challenges, ranging from raising money to finding our product market fit and our voice that resonated with the customer, evolving our distribution strategy to direct to consumer, navigating the challenges of COVID, being overlooked by the press and always being an underdog while we were starting in a little garage, while competitors of ours were raising $50, $100 million starting in New York City. Today, our challenges are implementing critical infrastructure and playing catch up from all that growth during COVID. And tomorrow, it'll be evolving into a global business. We really believe in our hearts that Vuori has the opportunity to be one of the most impactful apparel brands of our time, measured on a lot of different scales. So it's been crazy, but I'd have it no other way. And I'm so proud of the business that we've built. It's not just building a great business, but it's how we've done it. Prioritizing our relationship with the natural world, the environment, prioritizing sustainability, prioritizing building a great culture where our people can thrive. That is really, I believe that great businesses exist in the eye of the hurricane, and it's all about the relationships that we have with one another, how we treat each other every day, how we conduct ourselves responsibly. And I believe that when the customer touches our product on a rack at Nordstrom or REI or one of our stores, they're feeling the symbiotic nature of how we run our business every day. It's very important to me. So today, Viori has over 1,500 employees. We'll have 50 stores in the United States. We have an additional store in London. We're looking for our second store in the UK. We opened our first store in Seoul about a month ago in Korea. We opened our first store in China a couple months ago. We have a thriving business, and amidst all of this craziness and growth, we stay focused on three things that guide us every day. And that's making great products, it's being in great relationships, and it's living extraordinary lives. So I really appreciate you guys listening today. I really hope that some of my pitfalls, things that I've learned, will add value in your journey. And I want to just go through some of these things. I want to summarize some of these things that I've learned. Number one, go all in or don't go at all. You got to live it and breathe it, sleep it, obsess over it. Work-life balance in the early days is a bit of a myth. Number two, make great products. The world doesn't need crappy products or services with catchy marketing. The world needs great products and great services. Surround yourself with people that are better than you and empower them to be great. Got a long list. Never feel limited by a lack of experience. It's actually an advantage when you're starting something that doesn't exist in the world. Clarity is the ultimate currency in entrepreneurship, so seek out practices that cultivate self-awareness and stay connected to your reason for starting your business in the first place and make decisions from that place. Find a mentor, but never blindly follow others' advice. No matter how much experience someone has, only you see the vision for your company clearly. Listen to your customers, obsess over them, take calculated risks, but always remain nimble. Institutionalize what works and move on quickly from what doesn't. Become comfortable in the uncomfortable. I talked a lot about my relationship with fear, but I've always found that when you're scared of something, move towards it. And usually there's a lot of growth on the other side of that equation for your business and for yourself. Build your business responsibly, consider all stakeholders, and do good with your business. Build your business, or never give up, and lastly, enjoy the process. When your business becomes successful, the next paycheck's guaranteed, I promise you, you're gonna miss venturing into the unknown. So whatever it is you're pursuing, I wish you all nothing but incredible success. And I'm gonna leave you with one of my favorite quotes that I think has really become a part of the fabric of our company at Viori. And it's a Harry Truman quote, and it says, "It's incredible what you can accomplish when you don't care who gets the credit." Thank you very much.
The rise and the shine since I brought that up.
So Viori means mountain in Finnish, and I'm not Finnish. any sort of Finnish heritage at all. But in the years leading up to Vuori, I was committed to climbing all the 14,000 foot peaks in California. I was about halfway through. And my experience climbing mountains was a lot like life. And it was essentially like you go through a sufferfest, your feet are killing you, your back's killing you. I get blurry vision, I get altitude sickness. But when I get to the top of that mountain, it is like the most inspiring and beautiful moment. And I was like, that's the spirit that we want to capture with our brand. And so the Rise, the Shine, our vision as a brand is to inspire happiness. And the Rise, the Shine was all about how you do that. It's about living an inspiring life. And in those moments when things get tough, it was about rising up and continuing to build momentum in your life. And the shine was the feeling you get when you do. And so that was what we wanted to inspire within the communities that we serve as a brand.
Thank you, Joe.